Good. What does macro mean? You can only answer one at a time. Very good. We're going to be doing a review. We're going to be doing two reviews. We will do a micro review first for probably an hour and 15 minutes. And then my colleague, Glenn Whitman, will be here, and we'll be doing macro. So we'll be doing it together. Hopefully you have looked at the website, and for those of you who are watching on the website, there are 10 principles, as you understand, for micro. There are 10 principles for macro. On the website, there are 4 to 5 pages of notes that have been constructed and put up, including graphs and so forth, for each of the principles. So economics has review material available online. The review material was written by the same faculty members who wrote the questions. So the questions on the LDC exams for micro and macro are specifically tied to the review material that is online. So it's excellent stuff, and I really call your attention to using that as a review technique. Also, there are online questions. There's a quiz online. Those quiz questions were drawn from the same test bank as the LDC exam questions, and they've been removed, obviously. But they're the same level of quality, and all questions are not equally difficult. You should also be aware of that. There are some questions that are level 1 that are relatively straightforward. There are some questions that are level 2 that are more of the application kind of questions. There are a few questions that are level 3 that are more in-depth comparative application questions. So the reason I'm letting you know that is, as you take the exam, do not feel if something is simple that it's, there's some double meaning to it. It may very well be a very straightforward, simple question. My recommendation to you is definitions. The whole key to understanding economics is to know the terms. And I recommend using flashcards as a memory device to learn those definitions. And again, the definitions are online and are in the notes. Now, what I'd like to do first of all is a very quick survey of you to find out what are the specific topics you would like to review. And then what I'll do is organize those into a particular fashion and then go through and develop them that way. So let me ask you to give me topics that you're interested in.
Elasticity.
Okay, good.
You need to change the battery in your mic whenever you've got a second. Oh yeah, just a brief second.
No problem. Yes. Gains from trade? Okay. Great. No problem. By the way, throughout the review session, this symbol here is an A. The symbol right here is an A. Yes? Which is the same. Yeah, I thought that's what you meant. Right. Other topics. Yes. Your name is?
Michelle.
Michelle?
The Federal Reserve stuff, like first loan bank, second loan bank.
Okay, that's macro. We'll be doing that in the second hour. Micro topics.
Exchange rates. Exchange rates.
Is that micro or macro?
Macro.
It is macro?
Yeah.
Good. Give me micro topics only for now. Yes? What about them? Sure. Yeah. Other topics? Yes. That's macro. It's a cost of entry, folks. You have to have a topic. If you have a topic, I'll throw you out. You can only use 2 topics. You've already given me one.
Decentralized planning.
What is that? What?
It says show how prices affect allocation of resources
Okay, so the allocation of resources, right. You don't need to read these, I'll write better. Those are notes for me. Other topics, yeah.
Nominal and real interest rate.
Macro. Yeah, it's fine.
And the use from trade, I think I was referring to the comparative advantage.
Okay, comparative advantage is an additional topic, that's good. Yes?
How about like shifting the supply-demand curve versus moving along the curve?
Very good. Where's supply and demand? Here it is, good. Shift factors. Right. Yes?
With comparative advantage, can you also go an absolute advantage?
Yes, that's part of that discussion. Right. Good. Let me read off to you very briefly the 10 top micro topics. Opportunity cost, comparative advantage, demand and supply, price determination, allocation of resources through demand and supply, elasticity, average and marginal cost we should go over. Monopoly and competition. And externalities and public goods. Okay. Somebody else had a hand up. Yes.
I was just going to tell you to go slowly because I couldn't.
Okay, I will not be able to go slowly, but this tape will be available to be reviewed online. All right, good. Let me take you through a tour then and develop the basic concepts of economics and then move through to these particular applications that you have asked about. Economics is a science that analyzes how people behave in a world of scarcity. So the reason I bring that up is because when I ask students what is economics, you'll often say, well, it's demand and supply. And then X marks the spot, and they draw diagrams and stuff like that. But for you to succeed in doing these exams and to succeed in understanding economics, you want to understand that it is a paradigm, which means it is a way of looking at reality. It is a logical, structured system based on very clear-cut definitions and the relationship between assumptions and implications. So it's a logical system of analysis. As you take the exams, therefore, when you look at the various questions, you want to look at the question, identify the words that are being used, the terms that are in there, bring those definitions to mind, and then fit the relationship together and come up with a conclusion. It's not as if we're testing you on your memory in general. It's that we're testing you on your ability to think through a problem and reach a conclusion. So when you read the questions, don't respond with your feelings. Don't respond with your feelings about life. Like there's a question and you'll say, well, I think that's probably true. No, no, no. What you want to do in your mind is this. What does economics say the answer is? According to the economic paradigm, what is the answer to this particular question? Good. We start out by recognizing that scarcity means there are not enough resources to provide all of the goods that people would like to have. And the term goods simply refers to those things that you want to have more of. There are all kinds of material things we desire. There's the car and the jewelry and the travel and the real estate and the food and all those real things that we like. But there's also all those other things in life that you want more of. What are some of the non-material things in life that you want? Where's Thomas? Thomas is not here. Thomas?
Yeah.
Right. What are some non-material things you want more of in life? Personal things you want. Good. Happiness, somebody said. Good. Happiness, the economist defines as utility. That's what's inside of us. That is satisfaction. And the whole assumption of economics is that we're trying to maximize personal satisfaction through life. Good. Now, think that the next level down then. What things bring you satisfaction? And those would be called goods. We talked about the material goods, but what other things bring you satisfaction in life? Good. Time is a resource used to produce goods. Time is a resource, something available to us that gets used up in the consumption of goods. What are your other goals, though, besides materialistic goals? What other things bring you satisfaction in life?
Like maybe to be educated.
Education, knowledge is a good. Clearly, knowledge is a good. You all are here today not to bring you happiness, right, at this very moment, but instead to bring you knowledge which you feel will bring you value in the future.
Relationships, friends, family.
Excellent, good. There are all kinds of non-materialistic things we want in life. Friendship, respect, honor, interrelationships with other people. We are a social animal, as well as all those materialistic things. So stop and think about it. You have limited resources. Time is one of them. And the three categories of resources we talk about in economics are land, labor, and capital. Good. We have limited resources as individuals, and we have limited resources as nations. We have unlimited wants. We have unlimited wants. As soon as you expand the notion of goods, beyond materialistic goods to all those other things we want in life, we have unlimited wants. And that is what scarcity means. And that is the problem that arises from scarcity. We have limited resources, but unlimited wants. Now, stop and think about it. What does that mean you're going to have to do? In fact, what do you have to do every morning? Absolutely. You have to make choices. You all with me? Every morning you wake up. You have limited time. You have so many hours in the day. You have all these things you want more of. You want to be earning dollars to acquire those materialistic things that you acquire through exchange. You want to be spending time with a loved one. You want to be meeting new people. You want to be improving your personal skills, practicing your physical abilities, gaining knowledge so as to enjoy more in the future. So the first implication of scarcity is choice. You have to choose amongst these various alternatives. Now, as soon as you make a choice, the second notion within economics is opportunity cost. And I will guarantee you there are questions that you will see on the exam referring to this principle because it's such a large part of the economic model. If you have alternatives that you would like to do at a particular point in time, the way you make your choices in the morning is to kind of rank those in terms of personal value. So you might say to yourself, well, A is the most valuable, B is the second most valuable, C, D, and E. So you might arrange your choices in order of personal satisfaction or utility. What would you choose then to use your resources to acquire? The one with the highest personal value. Is everybody with me? Good. The notion of opportunity cost is the following. As soon as you use your resources to choose to acquire the highest valued alternative, the opportunity cost is the personal satisfaction that you would have received from your second best alternative. So economic cost, we don't always say opportunity cost, we just say cost within economics. But all economic cost is opportunity cost. And opportunity cost means exactly that. The value of the next best thing given up. Your cost of being here today is not the tuition you paid for this class. Your cost of being here today is the personal value to you of what you would be doing right now if you were not here. What would you be doing right now if you weren't here? Sleeping. Good. So, no, that's fine. That's fine. So at 1 o'clock this afternoon, you will not be as rested as you would have been if you had slept. You will not be as sharp this afternoon in doing activities as you would have been if you slept. You will not have the enjoyment of that physical feeling of relaxation. You will not have had the dreams that you might have had during this time period. You may decide at 1 o'clock you made the wrong decision, actually, to be here. But very good. The opportunity cost of any action is the value of the next best thing given up. When you spend $10 to go to a movie, the cost is $10. The economic cost is what you would have done with that $10, what value that $10 would have brought you, where you would have spent it in the next best alternative. The third implication is competition. The third implication is the recognition that because resources are limited, and because all of us or each of us have unlimited desires, then in fact we are in a natural state of competition with each other. I'm competing with you. We're in a state of competition. Because think about it. If the resources are used to produce what I want, then what's true from your point of view? They can't be used to produce what you want. You all with me? Scarcity implies a natural state of competition between people. You cannot eliminate that in any way. You can change the way people compete, but you can't eliminate the fact that we're in a competitive system. Because if I get more from the resources, they can't be used to produce what you would like to have. Now, the economic model of competition that we focus on within the course is a process of exchange. The economic form of competition that we teach within, that we focus on within the field of economics is a process of exchange. And the way we compete is the following. We each have certain resources. We exchange those, meaning we go to work, or if we own a building, we rent the building out. We exchange the use of our resources, and what do we get in return? When you all go to work, what's the trade that's being made? You give them your precious hours, and they give you money. Good. Let's stop for a moment and define what that is. Money is in one of two forms. Either it is a checkable deposit, where the check moves the deposit into your bank account, or it is currency. So money in the economy is the combination of currency that's in circulation plus checkable deposits, the levels within your bank account, not the check itself. Why do you accept those pieces of paper? Why do you accept those pieces of paper? I mean, you work all these hours and they hand you a little piece of paper. Today, they're not even particularly attractive. They're just printed by a computer. Why are you willing to do that? Do it by hand so we can get a conversation. Yes?
It has a certain value to you.
Because you believe others will accept it in exchange. Exactly right. The only reason you accept money is because you have a confidence that you can trade that money for other things that you desire. Good. So the way the system is operating is the following. I trade away the use of my resources. I receive money in exchange. Then I turn to spend the money, and I'm competing against the rest of you buyers for those particular goods out there. And I'm competing by offering dollars in exchange for those particular items. So the form of economic competition is a form of exchange, a form of people bidding against other buyers to get those particular goods. If Crest toothpaste has a price of $2.89 in the store, the only people who walk out of the store with it legally are those that offer to pay how much? $2.89. So notice that in this system of exchange, prices allocate goods. Prices are the allocation method by which goods are distributed. Only those people willing and able to pay the price actually receive the good through exchange. Consequently, the goods are distributed to those people with the highest personal value, as measured within economic terms. The goods get distributed to those who are willing to pay the most for those particular products. Now, how do we analyze this process of exchange? Well, we do it by separating out and looking at the two sides of the exchange process separately. So we focus in first on the behavior of buyers in the marketplace. We analyze the various factors that affect their willingness to purchase goods. We focus separately on the sellers, and we analyze the factors that affect their willingness to sell at alternative prices. And then we bring the two graphs or the two groups together, represented graphically, to look at the interaction between the two groups of people. So we start out by graphing, by graphing the behavior of buyers with respect to the price of the product. And we derive what is called the demand function or schedule that represents the different quantities per time period, horizontal distance. Demand represents the different quantities that people are willing to buy at different possible prices. So demand is a schedule of the different quantities buyers are willing and able to purchase at different possible prices. Very important point. Demand is not an amount. Demand is a series of different amounts that you're willing to buy at different prices. So the term demand, as you read it and see it in problem solving or in analysis, refers to that whole schedule of different quantities you're willing to buy at different prices. Now, let me ask you, what is the relationship between the price you have to pay and the number of units you're willing to purchase? Yeah.
Well, you're willing to pay more at a lower price. Buy more at a lower price.
Very good. There's an inverse relationship, isn't there, between the amount you're willing to buy and the price you have to pay. Good. So if I graph that as a bar graph, it would show me that on a scale at higher prices, this is a bar graph, the quantity I'm willing to buy might be this much when I have to pay this price. If I can pay a lower price per unit, such as $8, then I may be willing to buy a larger quantity. If I can lower the price to $6, I might still buy the same quantity. But the general relationship is, as the price of the product falls, people tend to be willing to buy a larger amount. And that is called the first law of demand. Demand is the whole schedule. The first law of demand says, as the price of a product declines, the quantity demanded increases. As one item becomes cheaper relative to other products, economics predicts that people will tend to buy more of that. As an item becomes more expensive, price rising, people tend to cut back in the amount they purchase and buy more of other things. So people respond to relative prices in this particular way. Now, we don't draw it as a bar graph or a series of bar graphs. We often draw it as a line. But the way to read the graph is to read it as a series of quantities demanded at different prices. We draw it as a straight line when in fact that is simply a general representation of the relationship between the price at which it's available and the amount you're willing to buy. If the price of a good falls, the demand does not change. What does change? The quantity demanded, to go to your point in your question earlier. Demand is a schedule of all these different quantities. When price changes, it moves you to a different place on the curve. So a change in price does not change demand, it simply moves you to a different point on the curve. It changes the quantity demanded. Now, in analyzing buyers' behavior, we're interested in what factors determine how much you demand. What are the factors that determine how much you're willing to buy at each of these various prices? So these would be called the determinants of demand. And those could also be called the shift factors. Factors other than price that would cause me to buy more or less of a particular product. Other things that might change, which would cause my demand to increase or to decrease. Well, let's start out and think about something. if you buy something, what has to be true? If you spend money on something, what's got to be true? You like it. Good. So the economist's phrase for how much you like it, and it is the first factor that determines demand, is called your taste and preference. Oh, that's good. Your taste and preference for a good refers to your general satisfaction that you get from that particular good. If you've developed a taste for broccoli, so you like the taste of it, so you'd be willing to pay some money to acquire that particular good. You developed a taste for Mondavi's Cabernet Sauvignon, so you like the flavor of it, you like the effect of it. So I have a positive demand because I have a positive taste and preference for that product. Now, if something should happen to make me not want the product as much, for example, a study comes out and says that, well, in fact, let me do it the opposite way. Suppose I have a certain demand today for Mondavi's Cabernet Sauvignon. There is some demand curve like this one that shows the quantities I'm willing to buy at each possible price. Suppose I now meet someone else who enjoys drinking red wine also. I now have a friend who enjoys drinking red wine with me. What will happen to my taste and preference? It'll go up because it's more enjoyable now. I'm sharing it with someone else. Good. As my taste and preference goes up, what would happen to the amount I'm willing to buy? It would increase. Very good. And so that would be an increase in demand, which would be a rightward shift of the function. More quantities at every possible price. So an increase in demand is a rightward shift of the function, showing larger quantities at each particular price. A rise in taste and preference, then, implies an increase in demand. And an increase in demand is a rightward shift of the function. Good. And then the event that occurs is she moves to Switzerland. My friend moves to Switzerland. What happens to my demand for red wine? It decreases, right? I'm not getting the same level of satisfaction from doing that. What will happen to my amounts purchased? They'll decrease at any possible price. How would you show that on the graph? A leftward shift. Very good. So an increase in demand is a rightward shift. A decrease in demand is a leftward shift. A second factor that would shift demand or determine the position of demand is the amount of income or wealth that I have. The fact is that I have to spend dollars to acquire these goods, and consequently the number of dollars I'm earning or the number of dollars that I have, wealth, are factors that would affect my willingness to spend money on this good or any particular good. Now, to make the theory complete, we want to address all possible relationships. For most products, which are called normal goods, it's a positive relationship. As my income rises, for a normal good, my demand goes up. As you all graduate from Northridge and you're working, most all of you are working right now, but as you graduate and you're offered $35,000 a year from Cooper's Lybrand, your income will go up and you'll tend to spend more on sushi. You'll tend to buy more steak dinners. You'll tend to buy more of many, many products. However, to be complete, as your income rises, for some products you would tend to buy less of them. As your income goes up, you tend to cut back on your purchase of certain products. So we'll define those as inferior goods. And for inferior goods, a rise in the income implies a decrease in demand. How many know this product called Hamburger Helper? You all familiar with that? It's basically powdered fat in a box, isn't it? And you mix it up with ground beef or chicken and it gives it flavor, even lasagna flavor and other flavors. Good. Well, you might currently, on your current level of income, use it 3 times a month to supplement various meals. When your income goes up and you're earning $35,000 a year, what may happen to your purchase of Hamburger Helper? It'll go down, right? As your income rises, your demand for that product declines. That's an example then of an inferior good, how your demand shifts when an income change occurs. Third factor that affects my demand for any particular good is the price of other goods. Because I can choose among alternatives, changes in the price of other factors will also affect my demand for this factor. And the 2 subcategories in that relationship are substitute products and complementary products. If substitutes fall in price, that would tend to decrease my demand for this particular product. If substitutes become cheaper, I'll tend to move over and buy more of them, and that would decrease my demand for this product. If substitutes become more expensive, what would happen to demand here? It would increase, right? As substitutes become more expensive, I would switch and buy more of this product, and increase in demand. Complements are goods that are used together in an activity. Here we get an inverse relationship to price. If there is a rise in the price of a complementary good, that suggests a decrease in my demand for the other product. DVD players and DVDs. DVD players and DVDs. Complementary products. You use both together to watch movies. As DVD players become cheaper, what would happen to your demand for DVDs? Would go up. Good. So they move in the same direction. Finally, price. Yes.
I'm sorry. For the substitute products, you said when the price goes down, wouldn't you want more of it?
No, right, but it's 2 different goods. It's 2 different goods. We're saying, like, here's good A, here's good B. If good B falls in price, you'll buy a larger quantity demanded of good B, right? Very good. And as you buy more of that, over for good A, the demand would decline. Right. Good. 4th determinant of demand is price expectations. Meaning my expectations of the future price of this product. If I anticipate this product's going to become more expensive, what would you tend to do today? Buy more of it. Very good. So a rise in future price expectations raises demand today. That's an increase in demand or a rightward shift. Finally, to get the market demand, to get the total demand for the whole group of buyers, I simply add up the demand curves for all of the buyers in the marketplace. So market demand is the sum of the demands for the various buyers currently in the marketplace. Market demand adds up. The demand facing the seller adds up. How many you're willing to buy, how many Loopy's willing to buy, how many Jeff's willing to buy, until I get a total amount demanded at each particular price. As more people move into an area, what would happen to demand? It would go up because you're adding in more people. As people leave an area, demand will go down. Good. Questions about buyers' behavior? Good. The other side of the market, then, is the seller's behavior.
Professor,
Yes.
one question.
Frank?
For number 5, the number of buyers?
Yes.
Okay, so if the number of buyers increases, the demand, what's the demand increases?
Very good. Because you'd be
Shift the thing.
very good. Right. Exactly. Because you'd be adding in the planned purchases of additional people. Good. Now, as I said, we're employing an assumption of what is called ceteris paribus as we go through our analysis. Ceteris paribus basically means other things held constant. So you'll notice that I listed one thing at a time, and I showed the direction of effect for each of those particular factors. In reality, the true demand depends on all those things happening simultaneously. Our analysis, though, can separate out our 5 factors and talk about each factor one at a time. And that's the assumption that we employ as we develop the economic model. So reality is more complex because all those things might be shifting simultaneously. And to really study what's happening, you have to find a way of separating out the effects and then measuring those particular effects. Good. If you study sellers' behavior, sellers are attempting to do what? Spring?
They're tempted to sell more and make more profit.
Very good. Our assumption in economics is that business firms are attempting to maximize profit, maximize economic profit. And economic profit, you'll recall, is defined as the total revenue flowing into the firm minus the total cost of operation. So total revenue equals the price per unit times the quantity being sold. Total cost is total opportunity cost. Now, as a seller, therefore, I tend to have a positive response to price, meaning the supply curve or the supply schedule is upward sloping. If I can sell a product for higher prices, then I'm willing to provide a larger quantity to the marketplace. Question: what factors would influence my willingness to sell? What would be the things that would determine my willingness to sell a particular product?
Demand.
Well, demand is going to be what I'm able to sell. Demand is the buyers now. They're over there on the other side. I'm a seller over here, and I'm thinking about what I'm willing to sell to that particular group.
Supply.
Well, it is supply, exactly. And what we want to think about are what are the factors that determine the position of supply, and therefore, what are the factors that would shift that particular curve?
Prices inputs.
Very good. It has to do with this element here. It has to do with factors that affect cost of production. So as we think about those various factors, the first would be the price of inputs. The second would be the technology of production. The third would be the number of sellers. And in some cases, we talk about the price of alternative outputs. If input prices fall, what would happen to supply? It would increase. Good. And how do you show an increase in supply? How would the curve shift?
Right.
To the right. In fact, it's the same, isn't it, for both curves? An increase is always what? A rightward shift. A decrease is always a leftward shift. Understanding the determinants, we can then put the two groups together to see how market prices are determined. And they're determined by the interaction of these two groups of people. Demand captures what buyers are willing to do. Supply captures what sellers are willing to do. Buyers want to pay what price? 0. Good. Sellers want to receive what price? No, sellers want to receive what price?
Maximum.
Infinite price, right? So right away, the two groups have totally diverse desires. You people want stuff for nothing, right, as buyers. As sellers, you'd like to earn $1 million an hour, right? Good. Well, how does the competitive process work? Well, it works in the following way. If, in fact, the price that the market begins with, and the market, remember now, is the interaction of the two groups, buyers and sellers. If the price begins at $8, the quantity demanded, the amount you guys are willing to buy, is only this amount, but the amount sellers have brought to market is this amount. What's the situation called? A surplus. Good, because the quantity supplied is more than the quantity demanded. If there is a surplus, competition between the sellers will drive the price down. Surplus means you've got stuff left over that you're trying to sell, and these cheapo buyers are not willing to take it off your hands. What's the only way to get them to buy more? Lower price. You understand how this works. Trade merchants understand how this works. They didn't need a graph to understand this. If people aren't buying as much, the only way to get them to buy more is lower the price. As the price comes down, the quantity demanded is increasing. At lower prices, you buyers are willing to buy more. As the price comes down, the amount I'm willing to produce is getting smaller. The surplus is eliminated by that competitive process until it gets to this particular point. If instead the price for some reason is down here, then the quantity demanded is over here. The quantity supplied is only to this point. What do we have? We have a shortage. Who's unsatisfied? Buyers. And buyers competing against each other will bid the price up. As the price comes up, due to competition among the buyers, the quantity demanded is getting smaller, the quantity supplied is getting larger, and so we summarize this competitive process by understanding that market prices adjust to that one unique price where in fact the quantity demanded just equals the quantity supplied. And that, as you know, is called the equilibrium price and the equilibrium rate of production and exchange. So there is a description of the competitive process that lies behind the standard demand and supply analysis that you're in fact used to seeing. Morning.
Morning.
How are you?
Good.
Good. We have the standard list. Do you want to take it from here and do consumer gains from trade, consumer and producer surplus?
Sure. All right. By the way, I'm Professor Whitman. I'm going to leave that graph alone, and just for a minute I'm going to talk solely about the demand curve. All right? All right. So you've already seen the demand curve. It sounds like Professor Tons has already gone over this, talking about how there are different prices corresponding to different quantities. I want to give you a slightly different way of thinking about the demand curve, and that's that each point on this demand curve tells you how much value consumers put on that unit of the good. So for instance, if we're looking at the very first unit of the good, right? Unit number 1 right here, all right? That means that there is some consumer out there who's willing to pay a price this high for it, all right? So maybe this price right here is a price of $12, okay? Now, if this consumer walked into the store and he was willing to pay $12 for the good, and then he saw that the price of the good was actually $8, how much better off is he going to be? He's going to be better off by $4 worth of value. All right, because he walks in and he gets something that's worth $12 to him. He only has to pay $8 for it, so he gets $4 of additional value to him. All right, we call that additional value to him consumer surplus. Now, by the way, this is a totally different use of the word surplus than we had over here. It's a totally different notion of surplus. Don't get them confused in your head. This is a good surplus, all right? That's a surplus we expect to go away. It's a bad surplus. This is a good surplus. It means extra value to you as the consumer, all right? So, supposing that the price was actually $8 in this case, then this individual has gotten a consumer surplus equal to this distance right here between 12 and 8. Right? So they've gotten a consumer surplus equal to this distance right here. All right? Now, what if we look at the second unit of this good? If we look at the second unit of this good, there is some consumer who is willing to pay this much for it. Maybe this is $11. All right? So some consumers willing to pay $11 for this good. He also only ended up paying $8 for it. So what was his consumer surplus? $3, and you can mark that right here. It's this distance, just like so. All right? Now we could keep on doing this, right? We could do this for every single unit of the good that was actually sold. Now, does anybody benefit from a unit of a good that's not sold? No, nobody gets any surplus from something that they didn't actually buy, right? So we're going to stop when we get to the actual quantity that was actually sold in this market. So right here is the equilibrium quantity, say. All right, so there's your equilibrium quantity, and we said that your equilibrium price was 8, because that's the price that people were actually paying in the store, right? And for each one of these units up through the QEth unit, all right, we're going to 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, until we finally get up to QE. For every one of those units, we're going to have an individual coming in and buying it and getting a certain amount of consumer surplus, just like this. And the very last individual who buys this good, this is an individual who walks in, he was willing to pay, say, $8.01. That was the maximum price he would pay. He came in, he saw it was $8, he bought it. How much consumer surplus did he get?
1 cent.
1 cent, right? It's just this tiny little difference here, okay? So, there are a couple of ways that you can do consumer surplus. One of them is thinking in terms of individuals, and you just count up the individuals who bought this good, and you find out how much each individual gained and add it all up. So you'd say, this individual got a consumer surplus of 4, plus a consumer surplus of 3, plus however much this is, plus however much this is, and so on, right? So you add up the consumer surplus of each individual, and that gives you the consumer surplus for the whole market. Is that clear to everyone? All right. The other way to do it, though, is sometimes you won't be given information about specific individuals. Sometimes you'll just be given a graph. All right? Well, if you notice here, essentially what we're finding is the area of this triangle, right? Can you see that? That what we're finding here is the area of this triangle? So another way to do it, and it depends on the problem you're given, which way you're going to do it, is you're going to see that you have a demand curve. All right, like so. You're told that there's a particular price, like this one. So you're told the price right here is some amount. We'll just call it P, all right, or PE. All right. We've got a quantity, QE here. And you're asked, what is the consumer surplus in this case? Well, we know that it's the area of this triangle. Can anybody tell me the formula for the area of a triangle? Yeah.
1/2 base times height.
All right. Area of a triangle is 1/2 base times height. Okay? In this case, we're going to say area is equal to, we're going to say the area of the consumer surplus is equal to 1/2. What's the base of this triangle? What is this distance? QE. That's the base right there. So we're going to say QE, all right, whatever that number might be. In a specific problem, you'd actually be given a number. All right? What is the height of this triangle? Is it PE? No. It's this distance right here. All right? So you'd need some number up here. So suppose this number, I'm going to call this P, what do you want me to call it? P max. Or I'll call PM, meaning the maximum price. All right? So in that case, what is our height of this triangle? PM minus PE, right? Okay? So let's be more specific about it just to make sure everybody's clear. If this right here, if PM was 12 and PE was 8, and the quantity actually sold was 100, then in that case we get a consumer surplus that's equal to 1/2, what's the base? 100. What's the height? 4. 12 minus 8 is 4. 4 times 100 is 400 times 1/2 is 200. That's your consumer surplus. Okay? All right. Now let's go to consumer. Are we taking too long here?
Yeah.
We are? Okay. So we're going to go faster for the producer surplus.
Doesn't mean talk faster, but.
All right. Faster for producer surplus. All right. Producer surplus is
For
just
those
the
on
flip side of
tape,
the
you
coin.
can slow the tape down. Actually, we'll talk faster, then you can run it at a slower speed.
Rewind.
Rewind, pause. All right. So this is just the flip side of the coin. Say you're a producer. You're somebody who sells a good. Say the minimum amount that you'd be willing to sell a good for is $2. And suppose you're actually able to sell it somebody for $8. What was your producer surplus in that case? 6. It's the difference between the amount you were willing to sell it for and the amount that you were actually paid. So if we draw in a supply curve like so, all right, then in that case, for some individual here, for some individual seller here, we would say that this is their producer surplus, the difference between the market price that they were actually paid and the price down here that was the price that they were willing to accept. Again, we could keep on doing that for all of these different sellers, and then add them up, and we would find the producer surplus. Again, 2 ways to do it. One of them is if you have information about specific sellers. You're told this seller was willing to sell for this much, and so on. Then you can just add them up. Or if you're given a graph like this, you just find the area of this triangle. All right? Once again, you use the same formula. The base is this distance right here, and the height's this distance. Let me warn you about the most common error made in cases like this. Does the supply curve always go through the origin? No. So what is the height of this triangle? Is it 8? No, it's not 8. If this number right here was 2, then the height of this triangle is what? 6. All right? So don't make that error. Make sure that when you're calculating the producer surplus, you take into account this doesn't go through the origin. So in this case, your producer surplus is 1/2. What's the base? 100. What's the height? 6. And so this ends up being 300. All right? Gains from trade. Gains from trade, the total gain to everybody from having been able to participate in the market is the consumer surplus plus the producer surplus, which in this case would be 500. So essentially $500 worth of wealth has been created by having this market. Okay? The only other thing you need to know is that sometimes you'll get problems where you're not looking at the equilibrium price. You can have price controls, or you can have changes in the price for one reason or another, and so you're going to have to be thinking about what happens as a result of those changes. All right? So in this case, suppose we were told that the price rises from 8 to 10, for whatever reason. For some reason, the price rises from 8 to 10. All right? Then you'd have to realize that now we're going to have a smaller consumer surplus, and you could figure out the difference, right? Could you figure out the difference? You just find the area of this triangle and subtract it from the area of the bigger triangle, and that would be how much consumer surplus went down. All right?
Okay, let me do resource allocation, then externalities, then we'll switch to comparative advantage, cost curves, right? Good. As Dr. Whitman's indicated, the gains from trade are made up of the combination of gains to consumers, consumer surplus value, and the gains to producers, producer surplus value. To be clear about this last relationship, the reason this is the area of gain is because the area under the supply curve represents the marginal cost, the opportunity cost of the resources being used to produce these particular goods. One of our principles is that markets will reach an efficient level of production. So understanding that adjustment process we've talked about, as we look back to this particular interaction of demand and supply, it's important to recognize that demand is what is driving the model. The demand is what is driving the rate of production. Demand is what you people are able and willing to buy at alternative prices. And think about the following. Demand pulls forth production along that supply curve. If this is demand, you'll end up with this particular price and quantity. If this is demand, you'll end up at this equilibrium, rate of production and a lower price. If this is demand, then that industry will adjust to this equilibrium, a higher price and a larger amount being produced. So the system is demand-driven. The economic system is demand-driven. Demand determines price. Not cost, demand determines price. The reason that is the efficient allocation of resources, and this, as I said, is listed as one of the separate principles. The reason that is the efficient allocation of resources is because you have produced all those resources that generate greater value to buyers than the opportunity cost of production. By producing at this particular rate, you've produced every unit where the marginal value to the buyer is greater than the marginal cost of production. You've produced no units for which the marginal cost of production is more than the value to buyers. So the markets are said to be an efficient allocation of resources because at the equilibrium, the marginal value of the last unit is equal to the marginal cost of production. Now, what if there are external effects? And this is an additional principle, separate principle in the list. What if there are external effects? I buy according to how I'm affected by something. You choose to produce, Esther, based on the cost that you have to incur as the producer. But suppose our exchanges affect other people. Suppose, in fact, when I produce something, it produces benefits to other people. Then the amount that I'm going to buy, that's this quantity, is based on my personal preference. But if there is a positive externality, meaning other people benefit, positive externality, other people benefit from the activity, then the true social valuation curve would be higher. It would include not only the benefit to me, but also the benefit to other people. Is everybody with me? The true social value would be more than my personal value. So where there are positive externalities, the optimal output level would be larger. If we took into account how much you benefit from my activity, then the amount we would produce would be larger than the market produces. So the summary statement would be this. If there are positive externalities in consumption, the market underproduces that product. You all with me? Good. What could you do as a government then to try and address that issue? You buyers buy just based on what satisfies you, but other people are made better off by your actions. How could I get the market solution closer to the optimal solution? Very good. Subsidies to the buyers or to the producers would allow for a larger amount to be produced. And so those are the two solutions. Either subsidize the purchase of the product or subsidize the cost of production. Now, what about negative externalities? Suppose that my actions actually cause a problem for other people. And I'll do this one on the production side. We said that the market will respond to the costs and benefits borne by the actual individuals involved in the exchange process. The market will privately adjust to this particular rate of production. And that's based on the costs incurred by the producers relative to the benefits received by the buyers. Well, suppose in producing this product, you also produce a lot of smoke in the city, which is called smog. And so other people are made worse off by this particular production. Is everybody with me? Good. What is then the true cost of production to society relative to the cost being borne by the seller? It's higher, because there are other costs involved that are not represented by that supply curve. The true cost to society, where there's a negative externality in production, the true cost to society of that production is higher. So if I added the private cost being borne by the firm and added in the social cost, the true marginal cost to society would be something greater than the amount being borne by the producer, which means the optimal amount of production for society would be a smaller quantity than what is currently being produced. Summary statement. The market overproduces those goods that have negative externalities in production. What are some solutions? Good. Impose a tax, and it would work if you tax either the buyer or the seller. Impose a tax on the producer of the product. That would make him incorporate that tax as part of his cost. That would shift his supply curve to the left and bring down the amount of that particular production. If I tax the buyers, that would make the item more expensive to purchase, meaning the quantity being produced would also be smaller. So negative externalities in production or consumption. The market overproduces. The solution is raise a tax on either the seller or the buyer.
Would you find it be more effective?
No general conclusion can be made. It depends upon the specifics of the exam. Good. Anything else you want to do on the efficiency? I think that's good.
I think we're good. We've got questions, though.
Yes.
How do you find the marginal cost?
How do you
find the marginal cost?
find it?
Yeah.
Good. The word marginal means what? Good. You guys all put this down, capital letters in your notes. The word marginal means additional. And while we're thinking about that, there are three terms that you want to clearly get in your mind as being meaning different things. Value, price, and cost. Very important distinction. Value or benefit, price, and cost. Value means the value to the buyers. And as Dr. Whitman indicated, that's the most you're willing to pay for something. Marginal value means the value of one additional unit.
Got an example here.
Good.
All right.
Actually, let me just finish this
Go ahead.
statement. So marginal value has to do with buyer's behavior. Price is the amount of money exchanged between buyers and sellers. Price means the amount of money traded from buyers to sellers. Cost refers to the cost of production, the opportunity cost of the resources being used. Therefore, marginal cost means additional cost, the cost of producing one more unit.
So here's a mathematical example of marginal cost. Can anybody tell me the marginal cost of the 11th unit of quantity here?
$50.
$50, right? You look at the change in the total cost, all right, and it's $50. However, there will be some questions where you're not given a change in quantity that is just one, all right? Now, the general formula is marginal cost is equal to the change in the total cost, that triangle means change, over the change in the quantity. So what if it were the case that instead of from 10 to 12, this was telling you from 10 to 15? Then in that case, what would be the marginal cost here? All right. Change in total cost is 50, divided by the change in quantity is 5. All right, so 50 divided by 5 is 10 is your marginal cost in that case. All right. So most common error that people make here is not realizing that quantity may have changed by more than 1 over here. All right. You should also be able to go in reverse. So for instance, if you didn't know what this number is right here, you should be able to figure it out. All right. How would you go about figuring it out? You know, the change here divided by the change here gives us this. What's the change here? 50. 50 divided by something gives us 10. What's the something? 5. 5 is the change, so add 5 to the 10 and you get 15. All right. You could also do that using some algebra, and I believe examples of that are given online. All right. We're going to comparative advantage now?
Yeah.
All right.
Let me have you do that.
Okay.
Now, we've built this model of buyers and sellers interacting. And we said buyers are captured by the demand curve, suppliers' behavior is captured by the supply curve. What we'd like to do at this moment is look behind this supply curve and look at how resources are chosen with respect to opportunity cost to be used in particular ways. And the comparison of alternative resources and their productive ability is the analysis of what is called comparative advantage and absolute advantage. And I've laid it all out.
You've got an example?
Oh, great.
Okay. So comparative advantage is a concept often introduced in the context of international trade. why it is that, say, the United States and Mexico would want to trade with each other. But actually, the principle is much more broadly applicable. It can apply even just to individuals, why it was that individuals would like to work together or trade with each other. All right? Now, let's look at this example here. We have two individuals, Robinson Crusoe and his man Friday, all right? And there are two things that they produce on this island that they live on together, which are fish and coconuts. This table tells you the different amounts that each of them could produce in some given amount of time, all right? So if the amount of time was, say, a day, all right? Then in a day, Crusoe could produce 8 fish or 8 coconuts. Friday could produce 10 fish or 20 coconuts. Now, just looking at those numbers, you might conclude that Friday should have nothing to do with Crusoe, right? Look at the numbers. Friday can clearly produce more of both goods than can Crusoe, all right? So, you might think that they shouldn't bother to trade, or that Friday should refuse to trade. But actually, it turns out that both of these individuals can benefit from trading with each other, all right? Now, first of all, let's talk about absolute advantage. Absolute advantage is what most people notice immediately. Whoever is able to produce the larger amount of a good in a given period of time has the absolute advantage. So who has the absolute advantage in fish? Friday. Who has the absolute advantage in coconuts? Friday. Also Friday, all right? So it's possible for one individual or one country to have the absolute advantage in both goods or both activities, all right? Turns out, though, that's not important. Absolute advantage turns out not to be very important. What is important is the concept of comparative advantage. And comparative advantage refers to being the individual who can produce a good at the lower opportunity cost. In other words, what are you giving up by choosing to produce one more of something? All right? So let's take this case right here. In the case of Crusoe, if he chooses to produce 1 fish, how many coconuts is he giving up? 1, right? Essentially, it takes him 1/8 of a day to get 1 fish. With that 1/8 of a day, he could have produced a coconut. The way you can do that is just by doing a ratio like this. You go 8 fish to 8 coconuts, and then just divide to get 1 on this side. So we're going to divide by the same thing on both sides. So we divide by 8, so we get 1 fish to 1 coconut. What does that mean? The opportunity cost to Crusoe of catching 1 fish is getting 1 coconut. All right? Now, let's compare that. That's what we have over here, by the way, 1F = 1C, right? Now let's compare that to what happens in the case of Friday. This was Crusoe. All right, now we're going to do Friday. All right, and he can do 10F or 20C. We're going to divide by 10 on both sides, so we get 1F to what? 2C. All right? So what does that mean? When Crusoe produces 1 fish, what does he give up? 2 coconuts. So, if Friday and Crusoe were hanging out together, and they decided they wanted to have 1 more fish, who do you think it would make sense to have switch over from coconut collecting to fish catching? Crusoe or Friday? Mm-hmm. Well, if Crusoe did it, how many coconuts would they lose as a result? 1. If Friday did it, how many coconuts would they lose as a result? 2. So you want to do it at the lowest cost, right? So it turns out Crusoe has the comparative advantage in fish. Because when he produces a fish, his opportunity cost in terms of coconuts is smaller. Now, who do you think has the comparative advantage in coconuts? It will turn out to be Friday. Now, little trick here, it turns out any time that one party has the comparative advantage in one good, the other party must have the comparative advantage in the other good. So that's the quick way of doing it. You don't have to recalculate everything. But if you wanted to, you could do it the other way around. And the way you do that, Crusoe, it's exactly the same because we got the same numbers on both sides. So his opportunity cost of 1 coconut is 1 fish. For Friday, all we would have to do is divide by the number on the other side. So we're going to divide by 20. That gives us 1 coconut. Divide by 20 on this side, how many fish does that give us? 1/2. All right? So when Crusoe produces a coconut, they give up one fish. When Friday produces a coconut, they give up a half of a fish. So who would we want to be producing coconuts? Friday. All right? So what is the result here? It turns out one individual has the comparative advantage in one activity, one individual has the comparative advantage in the other activity, and what that means is that these individuals can engage in mutually beneficial trade. All right? The idea would be that suppose Friday decides that he'd like to have some more, let's see, he's better at the fish. Suppose he decides that he'd like some coconut. All right? He'd like a little bit more coconut than he currently has. He approaches Crusoe. He says, Crusoe, let's work together on this. All right? I am going to provide you with as much coconut as you can produce in the amount of time it takes you to catch a fish. Right? All right. So here's what happens, is that Crusoe gives up a coconut. All right? He produces one more fish as a result. All right? Meanwhile, what does Friday do? All right? He could give up just half of a fish, and that would replace the coconut that that Crusoe just lost, right? So what's the result of this? He gives up half a fish, they produce just as many coconuts, and what do they get back? A whole fish that Crusoe just caught. You see that? So it's almost like magic, right? They were able, just by shifting their labor a little bit more in the direction of Crusoe doing more fish and Friday doing more coconut, they had exactly the same amount of labor, exactly the same amount of time, but they got more out of it. They got more fish and the same amount of coconut. Clearly, they both got better off, and they would probably share in those gains from trade. All right. Did you want to pick up here?
Yeah.
All right.
Okay, good. I want to talk about two more topics then, elasticity. While I'm doing this, I'm going to do a setup for average and marginal cost, and we'll finish up with that as a topic. We've talked about the fact that demand and supply interacting
Can I erase this?
determine the market price of a product and the rate of production of the quantity exchanged. As Dr. Whitman just talked about comparative advantage, you can apply that to the supply and demand model and realize that the market only calls forth the production of those resources that have a comparative advantage in the production of the product. You see, only these resources are used by the market to produce this particular product. And these would be resources with a lower opportunity cost than these resources out here. So people respond to relative prices. And only those that have an opportunity cost less than what they can sell it for would be willing to produce that particular product. Now, we've said that demand determines price and therefore determines the rate of production. We're also interested in how much people respond to changes in price. We're interested in the next level of evaluation, and that is, when demand goes up, how much does price go up? Or, when supply goes down, how much does the price rise as a result of that? Well, those two questions have to do with how responsive the two groups are to changes in price. And the economist word for measuring the responsiveness of quantity to a change in price is called elasticity. Stop and think, what does the word elastic mean to you? If something's elastic, it does what? Stretches. Good. Elasticity would mean stretchiness. Within economics, it means responsiveness. Same concept. If something stretches a lot, you would say what is true? It is highly elastic. Say, if something stretches really easily, you'd say that's very elastic. If something doesn't stretch very much, you might say it is inelastic. It doesn't move very much. We adopt the same terminology in economics. Elastic means something that responds a lot to a price change. Inelastic means something that doesn't respond very much to a particular change in price. A first level representation of that can be seen with the slope of the curve. Now, elasticity is more than slope, but at this particular summary level, I'm simply going to use these diagrams to represent differing degrees of responsiveness. Here, where the curve is relatively steep, it suggests that when the price changes from P0 to P1, the quantity changes from Q0 to Q1, but it doesn't change very much. And so a very steep curve relative to a flatter curve would be said to be inelastic. A flatter curve shows a larger quantity response to a change in price. Looking at the same example, getting the curve up where I can compare them. Here's the same price of P0 and Q0, but for this particular demander, the same decline in price to P1 leads to a larger adjustment in quantity purchased. So we would say demand is relatively more elastic for B than it is for A. Why does elasticity matter? It matters because it affects the total revenue change that responds from various kinds of price changes. And to study that, we have three measurements of elasticity. We say demand is defined as being elastic if the quantity response is greater than the percentage change in price. We say demand is unitary elastic. Unitary would mean 1. So we say demand is unitary elastic if the percentage change in quantity just matches the percentage change in price. We define demand to be inelastic if the quantity percentage change is smaller than the percentage change in price. And the actual calculation of elasticity is a ratio. It's the ratio of the percentage change in quantity in the numerator divided by the percentage change in price in the denominator. If the numerator is larger than the denominator, it means people are responding a lot. Q is in the numerator, price is in the denominator, so a big number in size or magnitude means a very responsive buyer. If you get a ratio that's smaller than 1, the numerator, the quantity change, is smaller than the percentage change in price, then they're inelastic. They don't respond very much in response to that particular change in price. Now, why it's significant is the following. If demand is elastic, a fall in price leads to an increase in total revenue. If buyers are highly responsive to price changes, lowering price raises total revenue because they buy a lot more at that slightly lower price. You can see that on this diagram where I've suggested this represents the elastic demander. You'll notice that as I lowered the price from P0 to P1, total revenue went from this area, P0 times Q0, out to this area, P1 times Q1. Clearly, this is a larger total revenue than the previous case. If demand is unitary elastic, it turns out that changing price doesn't affect revenue. If demand is unitary elastic, an increase in price or a decrease in price implies no change in total revenue. It's just a trade-off. I raise price by 10%, you buy 10% less. What's happened to my money coming in? It's the same, right? I raise my price by 10%, so I get 10% more from the people buying, but you guys buy 10% fewer products. No change in total revenue. Finally, if demand is inelastic, if buyers don't respond a lot, looking at my situation in A, you'll notice then that in this case, a rise in price raises total revenue. As I move from P1 to P0, as I raise the price from P1 to P0, they cut back the quantity purchased, but the total revenue has in fact increased. So if buyers are inelastic, raising price increases total revenue. Or in this last case, an increase in price implies an increase in total revenue. What factors determine elasticity? I'm simply going to list them. They're in the review on the website. But basically, your responsiveness to price depends upon, first of all, the number and closeness of substitutes. If there's lots of similar products, and I raise my price, what will you guys do? You'll switch to the other product easily, right? Second determinant is the percentage of income spent. If something's a large part of my budget and it goes up in price, I respond by a lot. If something's a small item in my budget, like chewing gum, and it goes up from 20 cents to 30 cents, well, that's a 50% price increase, right? 20 cents to 30 cents, change of 10 on a base of 20, that's a 50% price increase. Well, I hardly change the amount of gum I chew at all. Demand's very inelastic because it's a small part of my budget. Good. Third factor would be my knowledge of the price change and my knowledge of substitutes. If I know a lot about substitutes, then I adjust a lot when prices change. If I don't know about substitutes, I'm more inelastic in my adjustment. And finally, the time period following the price change. The longer the period of time, the more responsive buyers are. That is such a strong relationship, it's called the second law of demand. The longer the time period, the more elastic the demand tends to be. The more people respond to price changes over a longer period of time. Now, Dr. Whitman's now going to move behind the supply curve, talk about the underlying aspects of the cost of production that lie behind the willingness of firms to produce. Excuse me just a second. Yes?
Can you repeat the last one, that you said a longer time?
Yes, the longer the period of time, the more elastic demand is.
Very quickly, I just wanted to add something on to that discussion of elasticity, and that's when you're talking about percentage changes.
Yeah.
Most of the time, you're probably used to using a base of the original value, all right? So you take the new price minus the old price and put it over the old price. However, when we're doing elasticity, we don't actually do it that way. Actually, what you want to do is use the price exactly midway in between, all right? We use the midpoint formula. So it's actually 1/2 P1 plus P0, which is just exactly halfway in between them. The reason we do that, basically, is because we don't want just the elasticity of going this way or of going that way, but of the interval. And it doesn't really matter whether you're going from P0 to P1 or from P1 to P0 if you do it this way. Same thing with quantity, just substitute Q's for P's. We still use the midpoint as the base instead of the original point as the base. Okay? All right, so now let's talk a little bit about average cost and marginal cost. All right, so I put up just a sample of numbers here. Average cost and marginal cost are things that people often get confused. All right? What you have to remember is an average is based on all units of the good that you are producing. And it's going to take into account all of your costs, including fixed costs, meaning costs that don't change in the short run, that you just have to pay regardless of how much you produce. On the other hand, the marginal cost is only looking at the change in your cost that's occurring from producing a little bit more. All right? So let's go through the process of calculating this just to be sure. Somebody got a calculator, because some of these are not going to be nice calculations. All right, so long as somebody has one out. We're first going to find the average cost, and the way you do that is by dividing the total cost by the quantity. So what's this right here? 100. What's this? 1,050 divided by 11 is? What is it?
105.
105? That can't be right.
95.5.
95.5. And 1120 divided by 12?
93.3.
Okay? In case you're unsure, all we're doing here is dividing this by this. All right? So the average cost is easy enough. You could also do it in reverse, by the way. If you have the average and you have the total cost, you can figure out the quantity. All right? If you have the average and you have the quantity, you can figure out the total. All you have to do is use a formula like this. Plug in whichever two of these you know, and then solve for the other one. That's all you have to do. All right. Now the marginal cost, here we're going to be looking at the changes. We already did an example of this earlier, so it should be familiar. What is the change in quantity from 10 to 11? 1. What is the change in your total cost? 50. So 50 divided by 1 is 50. Sometimes this gets put between lines because it's the marginal cost between 10 and 11, or sometimes it will just be put on the lower line and it'll be put with 11. All right? You should get used to either way of seeing it. Next marginal cost, difference here is 1. Difference here is 1120 minus 1050 is 70. All right? Now look at this. Notice that the marginal cost and the average cost are not the same. All right? In fact, the marginal cost is lower than the average cost. And this is not surprising. That's often the case. Because if you think about it, the average cost is taking into account a whole bunch of things that the marginal cost does not. All right? So if you're an airline and you're talking about selling one more seat on your airplane, all right, do you have to buy another airplane? No. All right? The airplane's there. You've already paid for it. It's already on the tarmac, right? So that's going to affect your average cost, the cost of having purchased that airplane, but it's not going to affect your marginal cost of selling one more seat on your airplane, right? Okay. So which one of these is going to be most relevant for you in making your decisions? Both of them are relevant in different ways, but if you had to know just one of these, marginal cost would be the one to know. Because say you're thinking about selling one more seat on your flight, right? You have to be thinking to yourself, how much more money am I going to get by doing that? And how much more am I going to have to spend by doing that? And you're going to want to sell that additional seat if you're going to get more additional revenue or marginal revenue, all right, than the amount that you're going to have to spend for that additional seat, which is the marginal cost. So you're always going to want to expand production when marginal revenue is greater than marginal cost. All right? On the other hand, what if the marginal revenue were less than marginal cost? In that case, if you produce one more, you're going to get some more money, but you're going to end up spending an even greater, larger amount. And therefore, you're actually going to reduce your profits by doing that, right? So if marginal revenue is less than marginal cost, you want to reduce your production. And therefore, the profit maximizing level of production is where marginal revenue is equal to marginal cost. Do we need to move on to macro? I don't know.